Hey, book lovers and podcast listeners. For those of you who know me, you know that reading is a huge part of my life. It's a way to escape, a way to relax, and a way to take a break from the everyday routine. And when I was caregiving for my mom, reading was a way for me to step out of the caregiving world and into a world that put my mind at ease. I'm also a big fan of books that have characters who don't always take center stage. And when I started reading this book, I knew I was going to have to share it with you. It's about a group of 80-year-old sorority girls who are navigating love, loss, and friendship. Now, unsurprisingly, one of the characters does have Alzheimer's disease, but the book is not about her disease. It's about her life, her friendships, and the adventures she has along the way. Today, we're talking about this incredible book and what inspired the author to write it. I promise, after you hear this episode, you'll be adding this book to your must read list. It's truly a bright spot that will lift your spirits. Now, let's get into the conversation. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. I always appreciate you tuning in when you can. Please help welcome author Robin Benoit. She is the author of the book, The 80-Year-Old Sorority Girls. This is actually one of my favorite books, and not just because the cover is pink, which most of you should know is my favorite color. So thanks for joining me, Robin.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So we were talking a little bit before we started recording this. You wrote the book. When did the book come out? I should have looked.
Oh, the book came out about 2 years ago in May of 2023.
Okay. Rapidly becoming part of history. We were just talking about how years are going by so quickly. So can you give us a little synopsis of the book?
Sure. This book is a story of 4 80-year-old women, mostly, who have known each other since they first went to college back in the 1950s. And they've known each other for almost 70 years. And they've been through a lot of life together. And the story is about life at that moment when they've reached their 80s, when one of their friends has Alzheimer's. And I used a lot of my own experience with my mother's Alzheimer's journey to write this story. And it's a sweet story. I wanted it to be kind. I wanted it to be something that I will back up and say I wrote it during COVID when times were just hard for everybody. And so I really wanted to write a story that was easy to read, that was kind, that was gentle. There's laughter in it. There's tears in it. It's just kind of like a real life story, I think. And yeah, the cover is pink, and there's a lot of kind of a story around that. But that's basically what it's about. And I hope that your listeners will give it a chance.
One of the things I really enjoyed was it's not just about the 80-year-old main characters, but how through their sorority life, they bring along the fresh crop of sorority girls, for lack of a better term, the younger generation, and bring them in the sorority world, the caregiving world, and just kind of how their life experiences are helping shape this younger generation. And obviously, caregiving does that, whether we would willingly or not. And I thought that was really neat. And if I recall, because that's been a little while since I read it, one of the younger sorority sisters ends up going into some kind of caregiving career, like a nurse. You'll have to fill me on. Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, a little bit. She kind of steps up to be a caregiver for this older woman. And I wrote this kind of multi-generational aspect of the book because that's what it was like for our family. It took all of us. It took me, my husband, my sister, my brother, their families, and my nieces and nephews. It took a whole crew of people to care for my mother. And so I wanted it to be a multi-generational story, and also as a chapter advisor for a sorority on a campus during that time, I was very involved with that generation of young women. And so I had daughters that age and I was advising young women of that age. And it just felt like I wanted to have that be part of the story.
So was your mom in a sorority as well?
She was not. I
Okay.
actually was the first person that ever did that. And I just really did it because my high school friends told me it would be a great way to meet people. And so I thought, well, I'll give this a shot. They talked me into it. And oddly enough, I'm the one that has stayed the most involved of everyone. And I didn't even really know what I was getting myself into.
Well, that's always fun. We better shout out the sorority that you're part of.
Oh, that's sweet of you. I would love to. I am a FIMU, and I pledged at Oklahoma State University back in 1981, and I have been involved ever since. And I currently serve as a trustee on my sorority's foundation board, and I've been involved in one way or another for probably 30 years on a national level. And, sororities just are not the stereotype that you see a lot of times, whether it's books or movies, that's just not what it's like. And I've always wanted to write a positive sorority story. And so I matched it with my Alzheimer's experience with my mother, and the 80-year-old Sorority Girls was born.
And what's the story behind the pink cover?
The first sentence of the story is you open the book and it says her favorite color was pink. And pink is my sorority's color. It's actually rose and white, but we all just adopt pink. And pink is my favorite color. And my mother always had her fingernails just perfectly polished. And I just remember them so often being this perfect, beautiful pink nail polish. And so they used that idea for the cover of the book. The woman is holding a balloon and you can see that her fingernails are painted on the cover of the book in this beautiful pink. And that just looks like my mom's hand, really. And um, I really wanted to go that route. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I goofed today when I chose to not wear the. I was looking at the pink shirt. I'm like, no, I like this one today, so I should have worn the pink one because I've worn a lot of pink in a lot of the past, recent recordings. I think that's why I veered off of that today because pink is my office is painted. It's a really, really, really pale pink.
Mhm.
Partly it's me, but partly because when the light hits it, then it reflects this nice soft warmth. It's a nice photography trick to put good color in your face.
Exactly. Well, and it was also my publisher felt a good color choice because it's a book that's basically feminine driven. And so we just decided to go with the pink.
Now, did you have the publisher before you started writing it, or did you find them after?
It was before because I've written two nonfiction books as well on the subject of optometric vision therapy. This was my first foray into fiction writing, but I went back to my original publisher, Brown Books, and asked Millie Brown if she would publish this story, and she agreed. So, yeah, I had my publisher before I started the book.
I had forgotten we had talked about the prior books that you wrote, which are entirely different than this one. So it must have been a nice break from a more, what are those, more educational type not stories, but not books. There we go. I could think.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. Nonfiction, educational, much more of a who, what, when, where kind of basic information story. And this was my COVID attempt to do something creative and inspiring. I think we all needed a little inspiration when we were staying home so often and so much. And so I decided I wanted to, instead of writing an Alzheimer's caregivers kind of guidebook, I told the caregiver story in more of a fictional way.
Which I think is also important because it's nice to see a character in a fiction story, movie, TV show, whatever, that's kind of showing like their natural life, not just you know, this is who they are with this disease. Your book actually kind of goes back to who she was before and who she is now and how everybody, helps her and it's very realistic for fiction.
Well, thank you. I think some of the best advice I got during this experience with my mother was that her reality was reality and to just love her where she was at in that particular moment on that particular day. And I tried to express that a few different ways and a few different times in this story.
Yeah, you did that beautifully.
Thank you.
I struggled with be in their reality when I became the primary person responsible for my mom because nobody explained what that meant. But now I understand, you know, if my mom was still around, it might not be 2025 for her. It might be 1975 or probably not 1985, but maybe. We don't know what year it would be. And one of the things that I learned after she passed that kind of cemented their reality is not our reality is she used to walk literally 10 to 15 feet behind me. And I tried very hard to get her to walk closer to me, maybe a little in front. I understood that people with advanced Alzheimer's lose peripheral vision. And so if she was right next to me, she wouldn't be able to see me. So that would be weird. So I understood why she didn't walk right next to me, wouldn't walk elbow in elbow, but she would walk literally 10 or 15 feet behind me, watching her feet. And I just was like, oh, this woman is going to fall, and EMTs are going to yell at me because I'm the bad person that didn't let her catch up. And a past guest who's also a dementia coach, we were just chatting, and she said, didn't you tell me your mom was the oldest of four? And I said, yeah. And she goes, well, that's why she walked behind you because she was keeping an eye on the kids. And I'm like, well, this information is not helpful at this point. But it made me think it's like, had I known that little chunk of information, then I could have maybe tried a few other things. Because if I slowed down, she would slow down. If I stopped, she would stop. If I turned around to, make sure that she wasn't 30 or 40 feet behind me, she would stop like, whoa, what? So I could have play acted as one of the kids, or I don't know. So I would have at least had another little piece of another tool in my arsenal. But
Right. I mean, I tried to mention things like sundowning. My mother had horrible sundowning. We dreaded that time of day. And just a variety of issues that she went through, I gave to the character of Vivian in the story. And also advice. There was a period of time personally where I didn't I just didn't know what to do next. I think we've all probably been there. And so it was 2 o'clock in the morning and I called the Alzheimer's helpline and a gentleman answered the phone and I just proceeded to tell him, how I tried to convince my mother tonight, or I tried to remind my mother tonight that my father had passed away years ago. And he said, well, that didn't go well.
no.
No, it did not go well at all. It was horrible. And he said, you just can't do that anymore. And he said, you're just going to have to lie. And I said, you think it's okay for me to lie to my mother? And he said, yes, I do. And you're going to have to embrace that and get comfortable with that. And so for the character of Lainey, in the book, one of Vivian's closest friends, I let her call the Alzheimer's hotline and learn that it was okay to lie.
So in case anybody wants to know, that hotline number is 1-800-272-3900. I will make sure to put that in the show notes, which I should always do. But you can also find it if you go to alz.org. I love their website because it's so tiny short. I always ended up with these long ones for my photography business, for the podcast business. It's crazy. But yep, they're there 365 days a year, 24/7. I can I can say it.
Right.
Um and I don't know, did you ever get comfortable lying to your mom?
I did actually. I became horribly good at it, and because it was just easier. Where's your dad? He's playing golf. He'll be home in a little while. Was so much easier than anything else, you know. Yeah, I think we all kind of became good at it because we just wanted her to be, you know, in as happy of a situation as she could be, considering what she was going through.
I was fine with therapeutic fiblets is what the support group I was in called them, but it still always felt just a little icky because it's like, I was always worried she'd figure out I was lying to her and then I'd be in trouble.
I know it's hard. It's
Although it
hard.
would have been interesting because my mom thought I was her best friend, which I joked was an upgrade. And so she was always asking about her husband. Does my husband know where we're going? Did my husband give you money? It's like, oh, and it was always in that kind of snippy tone of voice. He
Mhm.
was not a good caregiver. He had very little patience. And I think she remembered that. Like she would ask him a question, he'd answer it, she'd ask again, and then he'd snap at her. So I think she probably remembered that negative energy.
Mhm.
And that's why it was always, does he know where we're going? And it did take me a while to figure out. There was one day she asked me this question, like, oh my God, she asked me this question like literally every 10 feet. Her room was on the opposite side of the building from the exit to the parking lot. And by the time I got to the parking lot, I was like, I cannot answer this question anymore. I don't know if I can take her out. I don't know if I can do this. Like, just was not going down the right path. I put her in the car, buckled her in, walked around, grabbed the door handle, and as I was opening, it was like literally like a bolt of lightning hit my brain. I was like, I am not answering the question she's asking. So I get in the car and she goes, does my husband know where we're going? I was like, yeah, I saw him at lunch. He knew we were going to the nail salon. No, it's like she didn't ask again. I was like, huh, okay, well, I'm a little slow, but because I would always say, yes, mom, dad knows where we're going. Apparently that didn't answer the question. So it's unfortunate we have seem to have to learn these things. Like every caregiver I've talked to almost has to recreate their own wheel, which is frustrating because there's so much support and help out there. And there's, books like yours. One of my other favorite ones is called Blue Hydrangeas. It's about an older couple and the woman has Alzheimer's and they go through some pretty typical scenarios and it's set in Cape Cod and I've never been to Cape Cod, but I feel like I've been there when I read that book. So, you guys can add that one to your list after you read the 80-year-old Sorority Girls. And it's kind of nice, to experience somebody else's challenge in it's like, I don't know if safe is the right way to put it, but just kind of it's like refreshing. It's not your neighbors or somebody or somebody trying to give you advice. It's just like, here's a story. And it's a story similar to what you're experiencing. So, how long did your mom have Alzheimer's? How long were you her caregiver?
Overall, I think my mother had it for about 8 years, and we became solid caregivers for probably the final 4 to 5 years. She was living on her own originally, and then we realized we just couldn't do that anymore. She started wandering at night,
Ooh.
leaving, her home. And we also had to just be careful about things like food. And like I noticed she was just leaving food on the counter, and I was afraid she was going to eat it. And I remember so specifically calling my sister and saying, hey, I thought you were going to buy Diet Coke for mom. Did you put it somewhere that I can't find it? And she said, no, I bought it. And so I went and looked in the trash can, and my mother had consumed an entire 12 pack of Diet Coke in one day. And I think it's because she just didn't remember that she just had one. I think that had a lot to do with it. And so we were concerned about, you know, her in that realm. And then also we would get on the phone with her and say, Mom, open your pill keeper and take all the pills out of Tuesday and take them. Go get a drink of water and take them home on on the phone with you. And then that we couldn't do that anymore. We had to physically, one of us go over there and make sure that she got her medicine. And then we needed nursing care to help make sure she was getting her medicine. And it started out to where it was something we could handle. And then it turned into something that we couldn't handle. And, you know, it, and I think the thing that I really wanted to drive home in the story is that it wasn't my mother's fault. And you know, trying to remember the good times and trying to just remember who she really is and who she really was super important, and that and not to just be caught up in the fact that this was so hard and this was so frustrating and emotional and all of it. It was to try to separate that out. And I tried to remind myself often that she must have had really horrible days with me as a kid, and that I can have a few horrible days with her now. And so, I think my goal in the book was to try to paint a picture of what love looks like on really hard days. And I hope I did that.
I think so. You touched on something that I always try to bring up as often as possible is most of us don't plan on becoming caregivers, which maybe we should change that. But it's usually like that Tuesday afternoon phone call that just throws your life upside down and shakes you around. And you do what your family did. You start calling and making sure she got her medication. You start, bringing over food. Oh, my mom drank 2 liters of Diet Coke before she had Alzheimer's. So I was quite surprised when I moved her to memory care. My sister wanted to she thought she had a mini fridge stuffed in her garage, and she was going to bring that and put Diet Coke in there because they didn't serve the residents sodas. It was like milk, water, juice, coffee, tea. Um, and we were afraid she was going to like go through withdrawal, which she probably did, but we weren't aware of her doing that. But she never asked about it. She never voiced that she wanted a Diet Coke. But so that was at least a little blessing. But she, um, you know, like I said, you put in different little tweaks and new protocols is what I usually call them, and you kind of went back to life as almost normal. But eventually, I tell people you end up to your eyeballs in responsibilities that you may not have. Like there's only so many hours in a day, and there's only so many things you can do, and that's why I try to encourage people to have conversations with their loved ones a decade or more before you might even have to consider it. Like my daughter knows exactly what my wishes are, and my son-in-law knows what they are, and we joke about it now. It's like my family has a little bit of a morbid sense of humor, so we could talk about those things, and it's not depressing or icky. It's just hopefully and I've given them the knowledge of, okay, now we know what mom wants, and we know what we're capable of, and blah blah blah. So I'm glad that you illustrated that got really hard because it comes on kind of fast, even with somebody like my mom who had Alzheimer's for at least 20 years. She would plateau into a new level for a long time, and you'd get used to it, and then she'd have a progression, and you'd be like, oh, okay, gotta regroup. But
Right.
people whose loved ones progress faster, I mean, you just go from like doing your life to caregiving 24/7. You're like, what? How'd I get here? It's rough. So, did you move your mom in with you, or did you move her to memory care?
We moved her into more of a nursing facility. In the small town where we lived, there really was not a memory care facility. And we felt like it would be better to keep her local than to move her, 30 minutes to an hour away, just so that, I mean, we were with her pretty much every day, one of us at least in my family. And um, it's hard. It's hard to find care. It's hard to find locations. I didn't really want to move her in with me because me and my husband, I had two teenage daughters at the time, and I just didn't want that to be their reality, that they were dealing with grandmother situation every single day, and her trying to leave the home. And she'd been in my home so many times, and yet she would say, "Whose house is this?" And I just, kind of wanted her to be comfortable. And they seemed just to really, I don't know if it was just the same age people there at the nursing facility or what, but she seemed more comfortable and she was a little bit more calm. And I remember they put a monitoring device on her ankle when we registered her and moved her in that first time, and that made me cry. Um,
Sure.
it was very hard, but then I also knew that was for her protection. You know, the doors were locked, but what if she got out? You know, they had to do that. But it's things like that that just you're never prepared, I don't think, for moments like that. I remember um my mother, my mom was the kind of woman that would wear a dress and pearls to clean the house. I mean, she was just very proper. And I remember one morning going over, and the night nurse told me that they'd had a rough night. And apparently she got the toilet confused with her laundry basket. And you know, nobody is prepared
Mm-mm.
for these kinds of moments and these kinds of conversations. And I I think truthfully, to be honest with your listeners, that this book was therapeutic for me. I think I really wrote it because I needed to let some of that pain go. And there was just something about giving this situation to a character and letting her deal with it so much better than I did that was helpful in the long run for me. And so I would encourage you, if you're struggling, to maybe write down some things, you know, to even if you never publish it, if you do nothing with it, if it's just for you and writing is helpful to you, then I would encourage you to give that a try.
Yeah, I always tell people, especially in the early stages, prior to getting a diagnosis, generally is like if you're starting to have concerns, write down what's going on, date, time, place, details, and why it's concerning you. Because, general physicians get 0 hours of dementia training in med school. Got that from a med school doctor, so I'm not just talking I'm not talking out of a hole in my head, as my mom would say. And they only have 5 or 10 minutes, and I don't know if you experienced this with your mom, but they can really play act as normal for a
Oh
doctor.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And then how does the doctor know you're not the one that's got the issue, or maybe you're conjuring up things that aren't necessarily true for Lord knows what reason. I mean, who knows what
Oh yeah.
what they've seen, and it's your reality, but they're like, I don't understand, and in 5 minutes, you're not going to convince them that this person who looks perfectly normal is not perfectly normal. So it helps if you have this, notebook of things that, on this date, we were at the restaurant and blah, 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 whatever. It gives them more information to make a better diagnosis. But I know a lot of people that benefit from journaling, so I like that suggestion. Earlier in our conversation, you said that your mom really suffered from sundowning. Did you guys ever find a solution for that, or they just had to deal with her at the nursing facility?
I think it was at its worst, and I don't know why it seemed to get better when she was in the nursing facility, but it seemed like it was worse when she still lived on her own
Mm.
at about the year 5 point of this 8-year, 10-year battle with Alzheimer's. Um, oh, the evenings were harsh. She was convinced that the people on television were real and they were in her living room, and she she was just horribly confused, hallucinating, a little bit delusional, horribly confused, right about sundown and through the evening. And sadly, we did not know for the longest time. Um, she was dialing an old phone number that she remembered from decades prior. And she was calling my brother. And it was actually a gentleman that lived in a completely different state. He had this phone number, and every evening my mother called him.
Oh,
And, you know, he finally got in touch with my brother and said, "Can you do something?" And we said, "We will take her phone away from her and we're going to move her but can you block her yourself? I mean, can you block that phone number? Because, obviously she's got Alzheimer's and it's a problem. And he was very kind. The gentleman was very kind about it. I'm just sorry it went on so long before he found us and we were able to know that she was doing that. But then it was, we realized if we're taking her phone away from her, we have to move her. We can't leave her here without any way to communicate. And I mean, it became so obvious that she was not safe on her own anymore.
Everybody's always saying, I want to live in my home forever. I've been here 40 years. I don't plan on moving, which makes me want to bang my head on the wall for a lot of reasons. But my mom said the same thing. I don't want to be a burden, but I'm going to live in my home forever.
Yeah.
Lady,
Well,
those are mutually exclusive.
you know how we handled this? This was another one of my wonderful lies that I told my mother. I just told her she was on a vacation at a lake and wasn't it lovely? And it is lovely, and she went with it. Somehow that lie worked. And so she never said, "Where's my home?" She asked about some of her things, but we just flat out told her she was on vacation.
I wish I had tried that. My dad was really good about only doing home maintenance when something fell apart. And their home was, they bought it in 1970, and this was 2017. So what is that? 47 years? So yeah, it needed maintenance more often than not. And there was a stain on the ceiling between the kitchen and the family room. They'd obviously had a roof leak, and my dad had probably fixed it because it was not wet, but you could see the stain. And so we told her we had to fix up things in the house, and she wasn't going to want to be there while that was going on. And she did have a moment of clarity when she's like, well, you're not selling my home. I'm like, oh, no, we're not. Because we weren't. We were
Right.
going to rent it out.
Yeah.
And then she did that mom snap look at me, and you're not renting it out either. And I thought, oh my God. Like, what? Where did that thought come from?
Right.
Oh, I wanted to.
Yeah. My mom also used to go back in time in her mind so much, and she would give us these verbal clues about what she was thinking occasionally. And I remember one night she thought she was on a high school choir trip, and she was so happy. And they said that she, in the nursing facility, she was always pretty happy that she got all of the women around her out of bed and into like the dining room area, and they started singing songs like they were performing like a choir. And it kept the night shift on their toes, I would say. All the silly shenanigans at night. So yeah.
Well, my mom never did anything like that. She befriended, my mom's name was Diane, and she befriended another Diane, and they befriended a third Diane. As if that's not confusing for those of us who are not suffering from a cognitive disease. But the Diane S was, she was not the resident thief, but she seemed to acquire things. And my mom had her dog in memory care the first 18 months. And then they renovated the entire community. And I was struggling at the time because the dog was becoming more of an appendage than a companion. And I was like, I don't want to make that decision to take the dog away from mom, but I kind of think maybe it would be better for everybody, but I don't want to do it. It was just like one of those things where it's like, I could not make a decision. And the executive director and I had a really good relationship. And he comes up to me one day and he's like, well, we're renovating the community. I'm like, yeah, there's 10 parking spaces for memory care. And there are 2 dumpsters taking up about 7.5 of them. Yeah, I'm pretty aware of the construction zone around here. And he's like, well, we're going to be getting new carpet. And I said, oh, so you want me to rehome Misty? Well, no, I'm not saying that. I mean, this man beat around the bush so hard. It was almost comical. He never asked me to rehome the dog, but he made it very clear that's what needed to happen. So I did rehome the dog. I sent her back to the breeder that my dad bought her from. For anybody who's not familiar with buying a full purebred dog from a breeder, generally the contract is dual ownership because they want to make sure you don't do hinky things like DNA genetic wise, because they work very hard to have a very specific genetic, line, DNA line. Make sure they look breed standard and all that fussy stuff. This is coming from somebody who has golden retrievers, so it's like I'm part of that problem, although I have had rescue golden, so it wasn't terribly difficult to twist her arm into making her take her back, but it wasn't fun. But my mom had friends in memory care. For as much as she's like, I'm gonna live in my home forever. Nope, that wasn't gonna work. It took about 6 weeks for her to acclimate. Those 6 weeks were hell for everybody. But once she acclimated, she had friends, people who accepted her. Diane S. had heard my mom's repetitive story. The first time she acknowledged that she'd heard the story before, she told my mom, "You've told me that story 803 times," which cracked me up. So I thought, well, 803 is kind of a specific number. I was like, is that even possible? And then about 6 weeks later, she actually started repeating it. And I was like, ooh, this seems kind of like elder abuse that this lady who also has a cognitive disease. I never was for sure what, I never got to talk to her daughter. So I just dealt with her. So I don't know exactly what her diagnosis was, but it was just astounding to me that this poor woman could repeat my mom's repetitive story. So I think that's probably what your mom experienced is like, it's people their age, they're like, they have similar things in common. I'm assuming your mom probably found somebody that she was kind of, I don't want to deal with that person.
She would just kind of refer to everyone as my friend, and or say my daughters or my nieces or nephews went over there, it was kiddo. And, she never really referred to anybody by name. And then my mom just at one point stopped talking and stopped communicating. And we would get little glimmers of her. I found a Frank Sinatra CD because my mom had this old fashioned CD player. And I found a Frank Sinatra CD and took it in and started playing music one day. And I couldn't even fathom the difference in her. She like sat up in bed. She kind of, you know, just engaged, and I could see her not, I couldn't hear her singing, but I could see her lips moving and she seemed to be singing along with it. And we also did a lot of adult coloring books with my mother. And I put both of those things in my story just because it was it was amazing. We would sit there, I would get her up, or any of us would be there and do adult coloring with her. And almost inevitably, she would say something that day. And I remember one day, in just a flash of clarity, she looked at me and she said, "Spend as much time with the people as you love as you can." And and then she was back to mumbling and not speaking and just, but for a split moment, my mom was there and my mother was talking to me. And it's just the weirdest disease, and it's the strangest experience and hard experience to go through. And but every now and then I would just see glimmers of my mother.
Yeah. My mom had one moment of clarity, and thank God I was actually at a stoplight. We were coming back from her neurologist, and as I mentioned earlier, she thought I was her best friend. So she never referred to my dad as your father, your dad, none of that. It was always her husband. And we're sitting at the red light, and I don't even remember if we were talking. She was pretty verbal up until the end. It got to the point where it was all English words, but there was like no sentence structure or context. So it sounded like it should make sense, but it never did. I always found that really wild. One of these days, I'm going to practice words strung together that don't make sense, just so I can give people an example, but it's actually really hard.
Oh yeah.
And so we're sitting at the red light, and she looks at me and she goes, it was really sad when your father died. And I was like, what? This is like, I mean, she could have smacked me upside the head and it would have been less shocking. And I said, yeah, but he'd been sick a long time. My dad had had diabetes and he wasn't good at caring for his disease. And he ended up with renal failure. And so I said, yeah, he's been sick. He was sick a long time and, he didn't like dialysis. So I think it's okay. And she goes, yeah. Isn't the sky pretty? Okay, I guess we're done with that conversation. And she's never had clarity again after that. So it was like, but I was so glad I was stopped because I think I might have had an accident because she shocked me so bad. I was like, holy Toledo, what are we doing here? I mean, it, it was shocking. But I think the reason that music and coloring brought some of that out of your mom is for people who don't know, anything creative fires up all the regions of your brain. And it's also meditative, which I don't know how dancing can be meditative, but I guess it is. I guess I should dance around more. So I think it must do something to those connections that are damaged that just kind of, I don't know. Like I say this all the time. If I was half my age, had twice the scientific aptitude, I would so go into brain research because it is so fascinating, but I would probably just be the petri dishwasher. I'm not too interested in doing that. I'm more artist than science, so I don't know. I don't know that I'd be very useful in research, but um it would be interesting. So maybe if there is such a thing as reincarnation, I'll come back as some sort of brain researcher or something. So how long did it take you to write the book? You said you wrote it during COVID.
It poured out of me really quickly. I wrote this book in probably 9 months. And I didn't even really sit down and think, I'm going to write a book. I think over the next few months, I'll write a book. In the next couple of years, I'll write a book. I just sat down one day and I typed the words, her favorite color was pink. And the next thing I knew, I had 5 chapters and was just moving on. And originally, it was going to be the 80-year-old sorority girl, singular, and it was going to be really focused on this one woman and her Alzheimer's battle. But that wasn't the reality of my life at the time because it was all of us. It was, so many of my family members, all of us that were caring for her. And so it became the 80-year-old sorority girls. And I liked it so much better. And I liked the friendship scenarios that were able to play out because friends have been very important in my life. And I think that they sometimes become like your family when
Mm-hmm.
they're that kind of a close friend. And it just kind of grew a life of its own. And not to give great spoilers away, because I'm sure your listeners haven't read it, but there are characters I didn't even know one night existed, but the next day at the computer, they just were born. I would be writing and realizing, oh, wait, there needs to be a love story in this story. And so there is. There's a little mini love story going on, a couple of them actually, one with an older couple and one with a younger couple. And that was really fun. I hadn't thought of going in that direction, but it turned out to be one of my favorite things that I've done is to put a little bit of love and um, what am I trying to say? I think it was just, I wanted it not to feel like it was an ending for everybody, that life goes on. And as much as they were caring for their friend, Vivian, they all had different paths to lead and different lives to live. And so that was really interesting, to realize I didn't know when I sat down to write where this was going to go, and it went all over the place. Way unexpected for me.
You didn't outline it first. I think that's great. I didn't outline mine either. Mine's not published yet. We're working on that. But I'm gonna leave it there because I think That's a perfect teaser for why people should read this book. I mean, it's uplifting. There's joy, there's challenges, but it's kind of refreshing. There's still life after 80.
Exactly.
And it's
It
not
still is.
not isolated to just people in their 80s. It incorporates everybody. So, well, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed the book. I hope all of you guys check it out. The 80-year-old sorority girls. I'm trying to get it to not shine in the light. It's a nice shiny balloon.
It is.
And I want to thank you for whoever sent this to me. I've had it for a couple of years for sure. But somebody sent it. I'm sure it was somebody from the publishing team. And then I never found that email again. And we connected on LinkedIn, and this is the result. So I appreciate that you've been on the show. And the book is linked in the show notes, so you guys can go and find it in whatever format you prefer to read it. So
Absolutely.
thank you for
Thank you,
joining me.
Jennifer.
You're welcome.